Hello my friends and welcome to the channel for another Escape from Tarkov video. Tarkov has a lot of guns, like triple-digit numbers of guns, and while a surprising amount of them do see pretty regular use, there's definitely a lot of weapons in the game that, despite being viable in their own ways, I swear I just don't really see people use or talk about very often. For the most part, I totally can understand why. When there are 100 weapons in the game, inevitably there's going to be a couple in any given category that have better stats or better attachments, or they're cheaper or shoot faster so you can win fights more efficiently. But even when it's obvious that any given weapon is simply better than another, I still just can't resist playing around with Tarkov's arsenal and seeing what I can make happen with cool builds that some just write off as subpar. So that's what I wanted to go over in this video. A couple weapons that it sort of feels like the Tarkov community have forgotten about because there are better options available, or simply because the game has changed and there isn't a place for them anymore. To start this one off, I bring you the AK-104. Really, I think you could stick the AK-105 and 102 into this spot as well, because I don't think anyone really gives any of these short versions of the AK-100 series rifles much credit. However, with the AK-105 and 102, I think them being unpopular makes a bit more sense, simply because they shoot slower than their full-length counterparts. And because they use 5.45 and 5.56 ammo, that 50 RPM difference actually is a big deal. But with the AK-104, this thing keeps an identical fire rate to the AKM and AK-103, and since it uses the same attachments, it's basically just a shorter, lighter version of those rifles with slightly higher recoil. And because it's not really a popular weapon for players to use, it's actually incredibly cheap on the flea market, sometimes going as low as 15,000 rubles or less for a full durability rifle. I've just always really loved the silhouette of this gun. It's a short, punchy little version of the AKM, and I just think it looks so cool. I feel cool with it in my character's hands, and it's surprisingly solid to use, especially on CQB maps like Factory and Labs. So why did the AK-104 fall off? Well, aside from the obvious reasons that you can have lower recoil on a full-length AK, the RD-704 just kinda happens to exist in Tarkov, and so does the Mutant, and both of these rifles kinda make the AK-104 feel pointless. They're both short 7.62x39 rifles. The Mutant gives you faster TTK, and the RD-704 does everything the AK-104 does, but with better base stats overall. In this case, I really think it's that simple. While the RD-704 exists, the AK-104 will never really feel like the better option. But with that being said, here's how I like to build the AK-104. First, I start off by adding the JMAC RRD 4C compensator. When I run this thing, I like to just go loud, and this has the top recoil reduction for the 104. If I want to run this thing suppressed, usually I'm sticking with the PBS-1 suppressor because it just has the best recoil stats. Next, I add on the Zenitco B30 handguard, and I also attach the B33 dust cover as well. You can only use this dust cover with a Zenitco handguard, and it actually adds on some nice extra recoil reduction when you use it. For a sight, I usually run this thing with a simple hollow sight since it tends to work best as a close range gun anyways. Then I put on an Osavets foregrip and a flashlight or laser onto the handguard. I like using more recoil-focused grips like this one on the AK-104 since the gun already has really high base ergonomics. For the stock, I just run it with the Zenit PT3 stock for the extra base stats without making it too heavy, and I use the Puffgun SG-M2 pistol grip for the extra ergonomics. You can also add on an extended charging handle for some extra ergonomics as well. With this build, I end up with 74 vertical recoil and about 70 ergonomics. It might kick a bit more than a full-sized AK or an RD-704 with an expensive suppressor, but it's a very snappy gun with great ergonomics and a really cheap price, so it's kind of fun to throw away for quests. So next up, I want to talk about a gun that I do truly believe is a forgotten relic of a different time in Tarkov. The SKS was once a core part of the Tarkov early wipe experience. Whether you were the lowliest poor rat or a Chad with your W key taped down, you were running some raids with the SKS at the start of a patch. For a long time, the SKS just sort of had the most utility out of everything available in the early game. It had 20 rounders available from traders, you could put scopes on the dovetail mount, 7.62 PS was by far the best ammo available from early traders, and it's so cheap that it was pretty much always better to run this than a pistol for a raid. But over time, pretty much all of that changed. First, the SKS lost the 20 rounder as its default magazine, Then it became harder to put a scope on it from level 1. And then finally, the AK rifles got access to a ton of really useful attachments right from level 1 traders. And I really think that was the death sentence for the SKS. Now that you can put a sight, a foregrip, a flashlight, and even a stock upgrade on pretty much any AK right from level 1, there kind of isn't really a point to running the SKS anymore. The AK generally has better stats, it can go full auto, which is huge, it has much more room for potential upgrades, and it has a faster reload animation, which is definitely a big deal. But all that being said, I was honestly kinda surprised when I started taking a look at the state of the SKS in Tarkov currently. Specifically the SKS build with the UAS stock and the handguard that you can conveniently barter trade from Mechanic for 3 weapon parts, only about 60,000 rubles. Once you do this barter trade, you really only need to add a few more parts to be at full build, because the barter comes with most of the upgrades already attached. First up, for the best recoil stats, you can add on the weapon tuning SKS adapter, and then you can add on the AKM SRVV muzzle brake. This setup takes the recoil down to 53 points, which is basically on par with a meta AKM build, but on a 60,000 ruble SKS, which is kind of awesome as a budget build. If you wanted to run suppress, just use the SKS hexagon suppressor instead, which still has decent recoil, but does hurt the ergonomics quite a bit. Next, I like to add on the SAG AK mount onto the OP SKS dovetail mount, which gives you a nice rail that can take most scopes. And for this build, I'm just running an Elcan Spectre 1-4 scope, which I think fits really well for a budget marksman build. After this, I basically just add on a flashlight or laser for utility, and then you can also slap on a bipod onto the bottom rail and it's all ready to go. With the loud setup, I get 53 vertical recoil and about 60 ergonomics, which I think is actually a pretty solid stat line for such a cheap rifle build. Is it meta? Absolutely not. Is it surprisingly good for a build that only costs about 100k or even less to set up? Honestly, I kind of think so, and I'm really looking forward to giving this a shot in some actual PvP raids. For the third build I want to talk about today, I've got the MPX. This SMG is in such a weird position where it's legitimately an amazing gun, but there's like 3 more equally amazing guns in the same category that are just better in some way. The MPX is really versatile with lots of different builds. It's reasonably cheap, it has great magazines, a solid fire rate, and very low recoil. Basically, it has everything that you would want in a 9mm SMG. But then again, so does the Vector. It's not very expensive, it has low recoil, it has great mags, and it shoots faster than the MPX, so it's just easier to win PvP fights with. Then you have the MP9, which is extremely cheap, extremely lightweight, and once again, it shoots faster, so it's more reliable in PvP. And then now with this latest patch, we also have the Uzi Pro, another cheap, low recoil SMG with an insane fire rate that makes it awesome for PvP. The MPX isn't even a bad gun, but it just unfortunately falls in a category where fire rate is kind of the ultimate deciding factor, and it's just a bit too slow in that regard. But with that said, here's how I like to build my MPX when I take it out for a spin. It's a really simple build that starts with the MPX SD variant from Peacekeeper level 2. This one has an integrated suppressor and it comes with an upgraded stock as well. The first thing I swap is the handguard using the Midwest M-Lock 6.5 inch handguard. Then I add on some M-Lock rails and attach a flashlight and a Magpul RVG grip for some extra stats. Next I swap out the pistol grip for an F1 skeleton grip for the extra ergo, and I add a pair of backup iron sights as well. Finally, I just add on a sight, in this case the Delta Point Reflex sight, which is one of my favorites for SMG builds. With this setup, I get 31 vertical recoil and about 64 ergonomics in a very small and lightweight package, which I find really good for loot runs and questing on maps like Interchange. And that basically covers it for this discussion about a few guns that I think have been sort of cast aside over time in Tarkov. What do you think of my choices? And let me know down in the comments what weapons you think fall into this category where they're actually pretty good, but for one reason or another have been forgotten about or replaced with something newer or better. Thanks for checking out the video. I've got a link to my Twitch channel in the description if you want to come check out some Tarkov gameplay live. And until next time, stay safe in Tarkov City, everyone.